So tonight we're talking about Christianity. This is a quote by Marcus Borg, who passed away last year, who was just one of my favorite Christian writers. And he said he is passionately but not exclusively Christian. One of the things I love about Marcus Borg, just a great face, just a wonderful, wonderful face, that he gives a historical perspective to the religion. I remember one of my favorite children's authors, Madeleine L'Engle, she wrote the book series A Wrinkle in Time, who is you know her? Yeah, she's great. She was a Christian. I don't know if she's still living or not, but in the 80s, I saw an interview with her, and they asked her, what does she think of the state of Christianity today? She said, I think it's bloody awful, and I think it's the best thing we have. And I think about religion in that way a lot. It's so human. Have you noticed? That all of the religions, they're so flawed. And I've talked about this before, but if you think about it being a spectrum between, on one side, the fundamentalists, and on the other side, the mystics. If you think about the fundamentalists of each faith, they get narrower and narrower in the definition of what is acceptable behavior, text, all of these things. It gets really small, and more people are excluded from their religion or who is actually in the favor of God. This is true of all faiths. And if you look on the other end of that spectrum, the mystics of each faith all agree that all is love and love is all. We seek to be a mystical Christian tradition, a tradition that does not rely on the old dualistic worldview of good and evil, but rather sees all as united, all as one, all as love. That's what our name Unity means. So, the first thing I want to say before we plunge into this conversation about being passionately but not exclusively Christian is that not everyone in our community is a Christian, and that is A-OK. We have many people of the Jewish tradition that are here, some of the Muslim tradition, some who are agnostic, but they really like the spiritual principles that we present. We do not proselytize. We do not ask people to adhere to any particular doctrine. I would say if you believe in something greater than yourself, that would be what I would call connecting to spirituality. And for me, I have no problem using the word God. Some people don't like that. And I always say what Emma Curtis Hopkins says about that, if you don't like the word God, put an ooh in it, it becomes good. And you could really think of the divine as good, ultimate good, the great reality good. So, having said that, we're going to talk about the fact that we actually are a Christian lineage. But we're not, how shall I say this? Normal. We're not, yeah, that gets applause too. We're not your regular, just run-of-the-mill Christian. We're special Christian here at Unity. This is kind of a long quote, but I want to go ahead and read it. This is from Marcus Borg's book, Reading the Bible Again for the First Time. And he says this: it is important to note that this older version, when he's talking about what we think of is when people say, let's go back to traditional Christian values or traditional Christian thinking. That's what he's talking about. It's important to note that this older vision is often seen as traditional Christianity by both Christians and non-Christians, both conservatives who defend it and liberals who reject it. I'm not going to ask what you are. It's an election year. But this older way of seeing the Bible and Christianity is not the Christian tradition. Rather, it is a historically conditioned way of seeing the tradition, including the Bible, that has been shaped by circumstances of the past few centuries. Thus, the issue is not whether to keep or abandon the Christian tradition, but a transition from one way of seeing it to another. The question concerns the lenses through which we see and read the Bible and the Christian tradition as a whole. Let me see if I can break this down for you just a little bit. What he's saying is this. There is this idea that there is something called the Christian tradition. And it's like this, like handed down from God on stone tablets. And this is what we think of as being the tradition. And he's saying it actually doesn't exist. It's being reinterpreted and evolved over every century. There's new thought, and our cultural biases change, our understanding changes. And so there really is no one Christian tradition that we used to have, where we all used to agree, and that's not the way it works. And that, for many, that is challenging. Like, you mean we could just believe anything? And for some of us, for me, it feels very hopeful. Because Christianity, like all religions, is made by people. And all the ones I know are imperfect. Maybe you know some other ones. And if you look at some of the things that have been done in the name of Christianity over the centuries, don't you want it to be evolving? Yes. And that's what I believe is exciting for us in this part of Christianity, the New Thought tradition, is I think that we can be sort of on that leading edge of new thought about this ancient religion. But I just wanted to start with that quote. So we get this idea that it's more fluid than we realize. This is another one of my favorite authors. This is Brian D. McLaren. I'm going to be looking a little bit at his book tonight. It's called A New Kind of Christianity, 10 Questions that are Shaping or Transforming the Faith. And they're great questions that he brings up, things like inerrancy of the Bible, the authority question, the sexuality question, things that are really, people are beginning to take up in Christianity in a new way. But the 10th question is the one that I want to focus on tonight, which is, I guess I don't have a slide for that. It's called the pluralism question. And what he says about this is, I thought I had a slide, but I guess I forgot. How should followers of Jesus relate to people of other religions? We wake up each day in a world whose very future is threatened by interreligious fear, hatred, and violence. Many of us wonder if there is a way to have both a deep identity in Christ and irenic is aimed toward peace, charitable, neighborly attitude toward people of other faiths. So we ask, is Jesus the only way? The only way to what? How can a belief in uniqueness and the universality of Christ be held without implying the religious supremacy and exclusivity of the Christian religion? The question he's asking is, can you really be a follower of Christ and still love other faith traditions, still have space and generosity that yours, it may be the right way for you, but maybe it's not the right way. Or maybe it's a right way. I have a feeling I'm mostly preaching to the choir, right? There may be, I just wanted to give us some clarity around this. Another really interesting thing about this book, he talks about so much of this. I was talking about Marcus Borg and the evolutionary lens with which we view Christianity. McLaren says that so much of Christianity is shaped not by Judaism and not by any spiritual principle, but by the Greco-Roman worldview. That there is, and he has beautiful, beautiful illustrations of how this came to be. The whole eschatology and end-time thinking, that's really a Greco-Roman thing. And this idea of my way or the highway when it comes to religion, that's what the Romans did. And the Greeks, they were conquerors, right? They were rulers. Go in and root out the other people, rule them. And that mindset has absolutely been established in Christianity, and it's still there. I get witnessed to every once in a while, and I see it. People are trying to conquer me for Christ. I don't know why that was funny, but I liked it. But yeah, you know what I mean? That is still present. This idea that I am onward Christian soldiers. I mean, really. And what Brian McLaren is showing us is that view of this sort of militaristic, conquering Christianity has nothing to do with Jesus or his teachings. Yeah. So what does it mean to be a Christian? Well, I'm going to start with the evangelical Christian view. This is kind of what I grew up with, and there were certain things that you had to believe to really be a Christian. Now, where I grew up kind of, Pentecostal and Methodist, but the Pentecostals believed that not only did you have to accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, and then there's some debate about the once saved, always saved, I don't know. Some believe that you could backslide right out of your salvation into in the dark place. I don't know why I'm getting this accent when I'm talking about it, but it comes out. But the Pentecostals also believe that you must have evidence of your salvation by the speaking in tongues. And you know where the charismatics live in heaven? In the Shundalacondos. Only the people who've been around it know how funny that is. Okay. So here are the beliefs that for evangelical professions of faith, we must believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, the physical resurrection, the blood atonement of sin, heaven and hell as literal places, and that there is no other path to reconciliation with God. For many, many Christians, you must believe, check these off if you're going to be a Christian. Okay? This is how I grew up. I no longer believe this. And in Unity, we try to have a much more broad understanding. And this, though, is the interesting thing. Literally, to be Christian, the word means to be a follower of Christ, not a believer in things about Christ, but one who endeavors to live the teaching that Jesus brought to earth. Do you feel the difference? This is the type of Christianity that we want to be calling ourselves into in Unity, is to, and I use the word endeavor to try to live this way, because it is not easy. Some of the things Jesus taught us is don't judge. Really? It's so much fun. You know, me and my best friend, Reverend Chris Terry, we've been sober a long time, and when we were in ministerial school, we developed this thing. It's like, we don't drink anymore, so instead of having happy hour, we thought, let's just have judgment hour. And we would just like ring a little bell, ring, and then we'd just judge people. It was really fun. You know. But Jesus told us not to. And the sophistication of the understanding of what Jesus taught us in that very simple teaching is don't judge lest you be judged. The same measure with which you judge others, it is measured to you. This is projection. This is psychological understanding that what's inside, the way I am shaping reality around myself is the way I will see the world. And the other way too. When I am judging something out in the world, it's because I'm judging something here. And the healing that comes in our lives when we will stop. Just quit it. Don't do it. And I know it's hard, particularly in an election year. It is hard to not judge. We can discern without judging. Jesus said, love your enemies. Well, that's not easy either. Not easy. He said, even the tax collectors love their friends and family. But to love your enemies. Seek first the kingdom of God. But no, that's the Mercedes and the Porsches. Those aren't in the kingdom of God, right? We're supposed to seek the wealth and the fame and the prestige. Isn't that what we're supposed to seek on earth? The fancy neighborhoods, no. And Jesus even said, don't even worry about earthly things. Look to the lilies of the field. Radical teaching. I don't see anything about virgin birth, blood atonement for sins. It's easy, I will say, it is easy to adhere to a belief system, to say, I believe this is true. This is hard. To live, to endeavor to live, to be a follower of Christ. Well, that is the definition of Christianity that I use. What do we say? So I'm just going to get real with you for a second about my family. They would subscribe to the former definition of Christian. And so when somebody from that world asks me, are you a Christian? And I know full well they don't mean attempting to follow the teachings of Christ. They mean that. How do I answer? How do you answer? I'm not going to tell you. I will tell you, for what I have done, there are times And my dear friend Cindy Wigglesworth has really helped me in understanding this. I can feel absolutely confident in saying, yes, I am a Christian, knowing full well that they expect me to believe this, but that's not what I mean. And I am absolutely in integrity and authenticity in saying I am a Christian. I have other friends who say they will not answer that question affirmatively because they don't want to confuse or lead people on. This is for you to take up in your own way and decide how you would answer that question. I'm going to get to, actually, I'm not quite there yet, but you can just look at lovely Maya Angelou until I want to talk about that last part. So, I want to share with you a little bit of my journey. This is the story of reclaiming my Christianity. I was brought up, if the church was open, we were there. The Gotts were there. All three of the boys, in the pew. We were there. Well, we had Sunday school, then we came into church, and then Sunday evening we had church. Then Wednesday night we had Bible study, and then often we had, revivals several times a year. Should we have a revival at Unity? That might be fun. Let's just come to church every night, take a lot of offerings. It's really kind of fun. But we were in church a lot. And I learned early on in my life, approval became like a drug for me. That if I could achieve something, I could get an A in a class, all this approval came my way. I became kind of hooked on it. And I found that I could be the best little Christian boy. And all this approval and all this praise would come my way. And so I had this strong religious bent when I was a child and a young adult. I would have been one of the best little boys in the world if you had seen me. And in my teenage years, I began to realize that I had a deep, dark secret, that I was gay, and that there was no place for me in Christianity. So what do? Remember, I'm addicted to approval. I'm addicted to praise. So what do? I hide. I lie. And so for the next 6-7 years, from the time I was like 11 to 18, 19, I walked around pretending to be this perfect Christian boy who knew, believe me, I memorized whole chapters of the Bible. I knew all the doctrines of faith I was supposed to believe. And yet something inside me I knew was wrong, twisted. It's the way, because that was the mindset I came from. So, I don't know if I ever told this story from the pulpit. I feel like I may as well do it. I was at Oral Roberts University, my sophomore year of college, and I finally shared with someone that I was gay. And at that, I could have gotten kicked out of school because it's a very conservative school. And so my friend Holly, the one I told you, so, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drive to Colorado Springs, and my old youth pastor is a minister there, and he's going to cast the demon out of you. All fixed. Yeah. I didn't plan on telling this part of the story tonight, but oh well, let's go with it. Come on. So Holly Mooberry and I got in my 1976 Chevy Malibu, and we drove all night up I-35, across I-70, across Kansas to Colorado Springs. And this young minister who had this little storefront church, about 50 people, he prayed for me to be delivered of the evil spirit of homosexuality. And my worldview was such that I believed that was going to happen because I had this strong doctrine of right and wrong, good and bad. This is the Christianity I grew up in, and I believed that was real, that I was being oppressed by evil spirits because I was taught that. It didn't take. And so it plunged me into a period of deconstructing my faith. I thought, they told me wrong. And I remember one day I was lying on the bed in my dorm room at Oral Roberts University, and I started thinking about who's going to heaven and who's going to hell? And I started doing the math, realizing that, well, of course, only those people who not only just say they're Christian, because you Catholics, I'm not so sure, but I mean the ones who are born again, who, believe in all of these things. And then, of course, the Pentecostals believe you have to be speaking in tongues and jumping over pews too. And I realized it was something like 0.00001% of all the human beings who ever lived would be acceptable in God's sight. And when I just finally, it took me till I was 19 years old before I had that thought. And I thought, can't be. There is no way a loving God would create all of these souls who are doing that, because I knew I was doing the best I could do. I knew I was. And I knew everybody else is doing the best they can do, pretty much. Well, some of you. No, I'm just kidding. And a loving God would condemn fallible human beings to eternal punishment. Can't be. Makes no sense. And I described it like beginning to pull a thread on a sweater. And my faith began to unravel. By the way, that young minister who prayed for me to be delivered of homosexuality was Ted Haggard. Ted Haggard, a few years later, that church of 50 people in the storefront had grown to a church of 15,000. He was the president of the American Association of Evangelical Ministers. And turns out he was having sex with his male masseur and doing drugs. And it was like this huge scandal. And so when all that broke on the news, one of my friends in college called me up and said, "Do you think he caught that spirit from you?" I don't know. So the next period of my spiritual life, I would call it the dark night of my soul. Absolutely the dark night of the soul in my life. In my early 20s, really 20s. I love what Marianne Williams said when she was here a few weeks ago. She talked about a woman who was in her 20s and who was really struggling with depression. And Marianne said, let's face it, the 20s, a tough decade. My decade was very tough. And to lose my faith and my identity as the perfect Christian boy, that was gone. I was now the black sheep of the family. All of that approval was gone. People were now praying for me in my church to come back to Jesus. I began to drink. In college, I drank like my friends. I know there were a few of us at Oral Roberts University that drank, but I drank like college kids do. And then afterwards, I noticed that I wasn't moderating. I was drinking more, headlong into alcoholism. And I was lost in those years. And when I would think about Christianity in those years, I would be angry and I would long for it. I would long for that comfort of the familiar beliefs and the songs and the community. But I was rejected. It was incredibly painful to go from being the golden boy to the black sheep. And if you're going through a dark night of the soul, what I would like to remind you is that the way out is through. If you're tempted to use substances or some other distraction, don't. Get some help. Find a therapist, find a spiritual counselor, but you just got to go through it. Because you will come out. You will come out the other side. In my late 20s, I was singing in a bar in Dallas, Texas. Some of you know this story. And I was minding my own business. I was doing some Cole Porter, and this young man, a little older than me, came in, put a $5 tip in my jar. I thought he was going to ask me on a date, and he asked me to come sing at his church. He said, I'm a minister up at First Church of Religious Science in Dallas, Texas. I'd like you to come sing at my church. And I thought, what kind of a minister goes to a gay piano bar to find somebody to sing at his church? I thought, I think I found my church. So it wasn't Unity, it was very similar. But I got to that church and I thought, I remember my first service, I sang My hands were shaking because I was an alcoholic and I hadn't had a drink that day. And I sang Somewhere from West Side Story and What a Wonderful World, Louis Armstrong. I remember the songs I sang. And I remember listening to that sermon. I was waiting. Where's the condemnation? When are they going to start telling me how bad I am? And it never came. I kept coming back to check cash. They kept having me come back. And I began... There's something about cycles of 7 years in my life. I've heard other people say this too, but that was 28. I was 28 years old when I discovered New Thought, spirituality, and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Same year. Began to apply spiritual principles in my life, releasing the doctrine and the dogma about beliefs. See, that was it. I could say I believed it, but I wasn't living it. And I began to apply spiritual principle in the way I lived, the words I spoke, the choices I made, the actions I took. And slowly, things turned around. My first affirmative prayer, I was in a class, and my first affirmative prayer was for a better gig, because I was working at Bill's Hideaway Club, $75 a night over in East Dallas, and I just thought, I should have something better than this. And I don't remember exactly what my affirmation was, but it was, I now accept for myself a beautiful venue to perform my music where I'm beautifully paid and compensated and appreciated, something like that. Just remember, find some words, give it. I had to drop out of that class because I went from Bill's Hideaway to the mansion on Turtle Creek. I got a gig. And I thought, this stuff works. I'm in on it. So I began to practice these principles, began to take up these practices of affirmative prayer and affirmation and meditation, big one. I said, nothing has changed my life except getting sober as much as meditation. It began to give me a 3-second buffer between me and you. When you cut me off the freeway, instead of flying off into a rage, I had just a little bit of a choice. Okay, what do I do? Meditation. So, back to Christianity. Oh, I want to say, too, that during this period, I began to discover, because Science of Mind, which was that church that hired me, is the second largest denomination in the New Thought tradition. Unity is the largest. And I had discovered Unity in that same time. I would go sing at the Unity Church in Dallas, too, on Forest Lane, if those of you are familiar with that church. And I found that they weren't exclusive or exclusionary. Like, particularly at Unity, they had a cross on the stage, like we have our beautiful Jesus, who is not on a cross, you notice. This is not the Jesus of the suffering and the persecution. This is the Jesus who's going, hey, welcome to my party. So, the triumphant Christ. But I noticed that they would sometimes teach something from Buddhism. Maybe a Hindu saint would be quoted, and it was like, don't you go to hell for that? That's what I thought, because I thought those were all idol worshipers. We're not supposed to do that, right? So I had a little resistance. But then I began to discover that by being open to the wisdom of other faith traditions, my spiritual life became enhanced. And so I sat with a Buddhist group while I attended that church in Dallas for many years, and I learned the power of group meditation and chanting. Brother Chi Sing, who also passed last year, I sat with his Sangha many times in Dallas. I began to expand into a spiritual philosophy and understanding of reality through Hinduism, that all is Brahma, and yet there are all these beautiful expressions of the power of God through these many deities. And so that's kind of where I was. My life began to work. And I often say this, that in New Thought, we honor all paths to God except the one we were raised in. And I had rejected Christianity, and particularly that brand that hurt me. They rejected me, so I rejected them right back. But then, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I began to feel this something, calling, a desire to worship God like I used to as a child and as a teenager. Something to be devoted to, because particularly in New Thought and also particularly in Science of Mind, it can be very heady. And my heart was wanting to experience something. And so I began to open to exploring a devotional path and through another tradition. Usually it was the Sufi tradition, which is the mystic tradition of Islam, and the beautiful poets. You know, the one, I've shared this one a lot, but Hafez, who says, God and I have become like two giant fat people living in a tiny boat. We keep bumping into each other and laughing. My heart was beginning to open. And then Howard Caesar said, Michael Gott, would you like to come work with me at Unity of Houston? And I thought, they've got Jesus above the stage in that old pyramid. So this is a recent healing for me. About 5 years ago when I came here, I decided it was time to stop rejecting Christianity. And it's time to find my way to embrace my Christianity. Because the truth is, if you're celebrating Christmas, you're Christian on some level. I mean, come on, let's get real. And if you're singing songs about Easter and Christmas, come on, let's get real. So I began to explore, what does it mean for Michael Gott, New Thought minister, to be a Christian? The rejection thing is really interesting. This comes from the Course in Miracle. Only those who give over all desire to reject can know that their own rejection is impossible. Only those who give over or give up all desire to reject can know that their own rejection is impossible. And I realized that I was holding this root of bitterness, is what we would have said when I was a kid in the church. I was holding this resentment against an entire religion because it had rejected me. And it was time to heal it. So I began to try on this idea of being a follower of Jesus in a deeper way. Studying it, teaching it right here. You've been watching my evolution in this. I did a series on the Sermon on the Mount about 2 years ago, and I felt a connection to this wise and beautiful man who walked the earth 2,000 years ago. I can't quite describe what it is. Just know that some energy between him and me was passed and was forged. And I stand before you tonight and I tell you that I love Jesus. And I no longer am rejecting or resentful of Christianity. What I'm trying to do is be a Christian. Maya Angelou says it this way: I'm working at trying to be a Christian, and that's a serious business. It's like trying to be a good Jew, a good Muslim, a good Buddhist, a good Shintoist, a good Zoroastrian, a good friend, a good lover, a good mother, a good buddy. It's serious business. It's not something where you think, oh, I've got it done. I did it all day, hot diggity. The truth is, all day long you try to do it, try to be it, and then in the evening, if you're honest and have a little courage, you look at yourself and say, I only blew it 86 times. Not bad. Isn't that beautiful? So I don't know where you are, and I'm not trying to convert you to Christianity if you aren't. I'm not trying to tell you to change your Christianity if you are. I'm just telling you a little bit of my story. And I can tell you today that I am passionately, but not exclusively Christian. God bless you.